Yeah, we'll get into that because I want to get into the book. But first and foremost, where are you coming out of?
Well, right now, I was born in a little town called Gardenville, New York.
Okay.
I've spent my life chasing my career, have four children, all actually all doing better than me. I mean, I have a 31-year-old daughter who's a senior scientist at NASA.
Wow.
So so I just look at the fact that I'm very grateful that they're turning out. Of course, they don't listen to you about advice.
Right. Sure. Why do that?
I do that. It reminds me of the old Mark Twain. I saw Hal Holbrook on Broadway do when he was live and acting, do Mark Twain in a stage play.
Yeah.
And he has this famous thing about him at 17 or 18 and thinking how Hannibal is just so backwards. My parents don't know anything. I'm going to go see the world. So he spends 2 years traveling around. And the kicker on it, he takes a cigar, puffs for 20 seconds, and says, "Damn, you don't know how much that old man learned the last 2 years." I'm certain that was something that I'm kind of hoping is going to happen to me.
Yeah, absolutely. In one way or another, if you have the will, it'll come.
Yeah.
So I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, and before we get into your life and we get into your work, we've kind
Yeah.
of talked a little bit about running. I want to know, we're looking at April right now. 4 years ago, the world came to a stop. How did you survive the pandemic and how did it change you?
Let me see if I can get your picture back.
Yeah.
Um, well, the pandemic was tough from a, um, it really, the reason why I wrote the book is that in my whole world for that temporary period was falling apart. And I was a major contributor to that, let's be honest. But I had already started Reliance from nothing, ended up selling majority ownership to Blackstone, and they ended up selling to Florida Power and Light in 2021. And so I was starting up a new business. It was Grid Energy Solutions. And the objective was for me, I came up with a plan to develop backup emergency high voltage electric equipment in the event of a grid failure, whether it be an EMP, a hurricane, or what happened to Puerto Rico. And I got so far as to the executive committee at the board of directors at FedEx. And wouldn't you know it, 4 days later, COVID hits. So they basically shut down anything that didn't have to do with transportation. And that was a hard thing for me because I couldn't get it restarted. Um, the I'm not taking political sides here, but I had the Trump administration supporting what I was doing. They actually had a White House paper on it. But when the Biden administration came in, they wouldn't return my phone calls because they're just trying to do a clean sweep. So that was basically the low point of my life in the last 10 years, maybe.
So these days, if we look at 2024, if I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day and one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Author.
Okay. Okay.
I was a CEO. I was a professional executive. I was an analyst. Spent a lot of time in Mexico, and before that, I was a student trying to understand what the world was about. And before that, I was being raised by the luckiest guy in the world to be raised by my grandmother.
So talk to me a little bit about what you wanted to do in the third grade. What was your vision and dream for your life?
Third grade is a tough time to talk about. I don't have a lot of memory for it. It was kind of more and more of an my understanding of life kind of evolved a little after third grade when I was 12 years old. Uh, my grandmother, maybe we could talk about her in a moment because she's
Oh yeah.
an unbelievable woman. Owned a Ford dealership, and she got me a job cutting grass on Saturday mornings. So that's what I was doing. And in the middle of my doing this is June of 1966. I was a couple of the salesmen from the showroom brought me, "Hey, come on in. We're listening to a race." And they were listening to 24 Hours Le Mans. And it was it's kind of funny. I liked the movie Ford versus Ferrari because, I did say one of the lines at the sunset. We were listening, and there was one driver which was 35 miles ahead of everybody else. And he slowed down because Ford wanted to do a photo finish. And I can remember Ken Miles is the guy's name, the driver. Um, I can still remember looking at one of the salesmen and said, "Why is he slowing down? There's something wrong." And then when I saw the movie 10 seconds later, the son, "Why is he slowing down?" It was just kind of one of those little things you connect when you're young with something because but it introduced me to the world of endurance racing. I was never fascinated by respect. There's a respect here for Formula One and respect for NASCAR, but I just didn't want to be driving a car where I just turned left all the time on a racetrack.
Yeah.
And then the Formula One was really, it was about money. It's about money. And the amount of money they put in those cars is exceptional. But they're not a car you would take to the grocery store.
Yeah.
And so I started working at the dealership as a lot boy and learned how to drive. I drove parts trucks. And I just trained myself to handle a car well on back roads of Gardenville, New York. Um, and that's where my passion came in.
So talk to me a little bit about some of these other seeds of being an entrepreneur. And you mentioned your grandmother, the profound impact she had on you. How did all of these seeds take hold and grow into you and what you've become?
The bottom line is what I've learned and became a part of who I am. I tell this to my kids. I tell it to people who's had a bad break. It's not how many times you get knocked down; it's how many times you get back up.
Mhm.
And that really is something I learned um, from early childhood.
So who's been a hero for you? Has it been your grandmother?
Started out, I came from a divorced home. My father was a decent man, really did not have the ability to support us. So we ended up, my mother was a journalist, and we ended up moving in with my grandmother. So she's gone all day. I come home, my grandmother's there. So to give you the idea, we would call our mother and call my grandmother mom. That was the kind of relationship. And she took a shining to me that uh, she would have these long talks and she tried to explain life. And over the years, I started getting it. But it was just a unique experience where she started talking about fear. How are you going to handle fear when you face it? That type of thing. Or um, it's in life, as far as your moral character, it's more about um, whether you end up winning race in the end, but how well you ran it.
Yeah.
She would say stuff like that. And then there was other things. She just loved Churchill and his quotes, which were I have some in the book. And basically, she just left me with one other thing that I have followed in my life, but I'm human, I don't do it all the time. Is if you come across, she was a very religious woman, if you come across another human being who's in desperate straits and you have the ability to do something about it and the opportunity to do something about it, you have moral obligation to do something about it. And one of the things I try to capture in the book, there was a couple of instances where I did that. One, I put my career on the line to help a family out, but it's something I'm proud of, but I'm also not proud that I haven't done it all the time.
Yeah.
I'm human. I have my weak moments, and then I get back up and try it again.
So let me ask you this. You have the record for going cross country from Boston to San Diego. Tell me what that adrenaline's like to be in a place where where it's all working out. All the conditions are right. You're in first place or you're in that time place. What does that adrenaline feel like?
Well, I ran it twice. The first was with the love of my life, Nancy. I talked about her in the book. That unfortunately, through circumstance, ended. But I ran the first race to learn how to do it. The second race, I found another race member named Tim Montgomery, who was my partner on the last race. And we vowed we were going to do it again and do it right. We spent a whole year researching. We got a big break from GM. at the time, and I like to talk, I'll just talk about the era of cross continental endurance racing. The Europeans were beating us every time. But the year before I won it, Porsche sent over a couple of guys from their test car team driving a 911, and they won it. And just through luck and happenstance, the guys at the engineers at the Milford training gun in Michigan found out about the fact that Tim and I were going to run this race again. And they contacted us. We talked about it. They said, we got to keep this quiet. Corporate will not approve of it. And they basically finally got sold on it because they had researchers knew that we were serious drivers. And basically gave me instructions of a car to buy from a Pontiac dealership, how it should be laid out. And it just went to GM proving grounds for 6 weeks and never saw it again. But let's put it this way. This had a NASCAR engine and it had an 85 to 89 gallon gas tank in it. So this was a totally different car. It looked very ordinary, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of the break of having the kind of support you need to be able to handle it. Tim and I were in outside of St. Louis in Illinois. Tim and I were in last place in this race. I got arrested in New York for having an illegal radio because the cops couldn't catch us on radar. And it was a 2 hour experience of me going to jail, going to see the judge. The judge threw it out in 10 seconds. Just asked me a simple thing. I had a Bearcat scanner. You remember those types of things?
Yeah.
You could listen to everything.
Oh,
I
yeah.
said, hey, under the 1934 Act passed by Congress, every American citizen has the right to receive radio broadcasts. They do not have the right to broadcast unless they have a license. And she broke into this big smile because I guess she was irritated at some of the cops and pointed and said, you get cuffs off him and get him out there now. But all those things happened in the first half of the race, a breakdown. And Tim had asked, he basically wants to go home. He just wants to go home. And I have a come to Jesus kind of moment. He's sleeping. I pull off in Missouri off the side road and I just do some contemplation. And I started recalling, quite honestly, some of the lessons that were told to me by my grandmother. And uh, from that point on, we averaged 104 miles an hour from there to San Diego. From there to Adrian, Texas, I averaged 128. And we were in last place and we just caught everybody. Um, we were because we did the research, we bypassed what we felt were the roads that would be cause most police traffic. So we drove past the White Sands missile range and were able to sit there cruising at 140 and don't see a car for another half hour. And that's how we got it. We got lucky, but we were smart
Yeah,
and
for sure.
persevered.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Of everybody alive on the planet right now, if you could meet one person that you find fascinating, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
Alive now.
Yeah.
I got a ton in the past. Um, okay, you're gonna get mad at me. I'm gonna piss off half of your things. I really have respect for Donald Trump at his age fighting this hard. I'm not saying I support the politics or anything,
Sure.
but to be, approaching 80 years old and still get in the ring,
Yeah.
I think there's something we all, liberal or conservative, can learn from that character. I'm not saying he doesn't have flaws, but I'm just explaining to you, I look at him, he's fighting as hard as he ever did. I don't know
Yeah.
how he does it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of stamina, that's for sure. So let me ask you this. Speaking of stamina, what is that for you? What has been consistently the motivation for you to win, to achieve, to evolve, and to be who you are? What has that been for you?
First of all, I'm human, which means I've failed a lot. But one of the final quotes that I remembered from my grandmother and from Father Hesburgh at Notre Dame, President of Notre Dame, both of them told me at different periods of my life, you lived a good life if the world's a better place because you were here.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't mean you don't fall down. It doesn't mean you don't crash and burn once in a while, but that's how you pick yourself back up.
Yeah, for sure. So of all of the things that you've done in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of?
getting Tony and his wife to retire so he could get lifelong medical insurance. Because if he didn't retire, he's going to get fired and he'd get nothing. And that was goes back to the point I'm trying to say. Um, the world's a better place if you're here or you come across somebody and you. I was the only one. I was an executive officer in a company. I knew his name was on the list, and I hope they don't go back after me now. But it's statute of limitations. But yeah, his wife was an invalid and needed extensive medical care. And the night before, he had the deadline to turn in his retirement papers. He decided he wasn't going to do it. So I went through a channel of friends and kind of got a message to him that, and it was interesting because he always would say to me, um, he would always say to me that every bad break, every time everything went wrong in his life, he had a guardian angel watching out for him.
Yeah.
So the message I delivered to the guys I asked to call and tell them, when he says no, say your guardian angel is trying to look out for you. And that's what he took it. And he showed up in my office 2 days later, uh, knew that I did it. And I just felt like I'm a human being. I have empathy for other people. And I felt that was the right thing to do, although I could have easily gotten fired for doing it.
Yeah. So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom you've gained in the life you've led. What advice would you impart on that young version of you?
Wow. These actually requires some reflection. Uh,
Yes.
I guess I would try what I would like to do. If you take out the book, you're going to get there's like 2 or 3 pages of quotes. There's a philosophy of how you live your life, and I think if you just focus on that the world is a better place because you are here, you'll end up making right decisions most of the time. And I think that's basically it. And the second thing is that I do think you need to pursue opportunities when they present to you because that's a gift you've got. We're on this planet, what, 70, 80 years? And when it gets there, the other thing I would do, though, is I would definitely say spend more time on relationships.
Yeah. So you've been fortunate to see a lot of this country. You've gone across it twice, and I'm sure you've been around extensively. What was the one place, city, region that was just beautiful that you didn't expect or hit you in a way that you didn't expect it?
So,
Where's that?
New Mexico.
New Mexico. Yeah.
The Texas Panhandle was a desert flat. You got into New Mexico, and it just had peaks, valleys, long like miles of long stretch of road that you can see ahead of you and not see another car on it. It was very impressive.
Yeah. What's the fastest you've ever taken a car to?
Well, can I say I did the fastest was in my race car.
Yeah.
Can I tell you the problem I have answering the question because it's kind of funny. While we were in New Mexico, we were running her hard, and we had a they were had a 140 mile an hour speedometer in those things back in those days that goes up against the peg. Well, but in one of our runs, the speedometer pointer broke off. So we didn't even tell how fast we go. So what we did the rest of the time was try to plot RPM ranges in fifth gear and what that approximate speed is. We had a run in with a competitor who had not engraced himself to Tim and I, and we in New Mexico we ran. It was a Porsche 928S, and they have a top end of approximately 162, 164 miles an hour, and we pulled away from it.
Wow.
So I can't answer to a definitive what it
Sure.
is, but we were also going downhill, which meant that we may have been pushing 180, which is really what you shouldn't be doing that because it's almost aerodynamically risky.
Yeah.
The Pontiac Firebird I have had a drag coefficient said it could hit 200 miles an hour without going airborne, but I still worry about that.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, my best friend at the time, he had an older brother that had a friend that had a Mustang in the mid 80s, and he took that thing up to 100 mile an hour. He was like, "Let you want to see what fast is?" And we were like, "Sure." And then he started going, and we got nervous, and the whole thing just shook. Like I couldn't believe how bad things shake at that speed.
Well, it does because of the buffeting of air getting underneath the car, which causes a problem. What GM did for us is that we chose the Pontiac Firebird because they had the lowest drag coefficient of any American-made car, 0.299. That is even today unbelievable.
Yeah,
Um, because we're getting a sponsor of GM, it had to be an American car, and they wanted GM cars. That's how we ended up with it. But they put in ground effects underneath to keep that air from getting. You couldn't even see it. It was,
yeah,
but it was all there. You know, racing brakes. The car came with a 305 V8 small block and ended up with a 350 with aluminum heads and racing heads. So it was totally different. We could handle that speed. I never ran into a point where I felt the car was going to go out of control, but I had enough common sense to realize that you don't push it too far.
yeah. So, I've been a big sports fan my whole life, and we just got the Kansas Speedway out here probably in the early 2000s. And in my mid 30s, I went out and saw a race. It was one of the most astounding things I've ever seen in my life. I could not, I mean, the power and sound of those cars going around the track. To this day, it's like of all the sports that I've seen, nothing has moved me as much as that was. And I grew up, my dad would watch racing. He was a car salesman, but I never got into it. But when I saw it firsthand, wow,
Yeah,
it's amazing.
it it is. But it was the interesting thing is probably what I am. After my partner Tim died the next year in an ultralight airplane accident, and we're being pursued by the sponsors of the Baja 500 down in Mexico to try to do that. And I just decided that I'm retiring from racing.
Yeah,
Um, it wasn't my life; it was part of my life. Just like track and field was a part of my life, it wasn't my life. And right now, what I'm doing with this book is I felt that it initially started out as a letter to my kids because after COVID, because they had no idea of anything that's in this book happened before then. I never, it's like World War II vets never talked about
yep, yep,
it. Okay. And I wanted to say to them, there's some good stuff here. I wanted them to get the history of the family and the whole 9 yards. And so my mission became to write this book. My objective is to try to put it out there. Whatever God's will is for how much it sells, that's fine. I really would like it to be a screenplay. Um, and so I'm going to be working towards that. But that's kind of like a mission as opposed to my life. I have another task to perform,
sure.
and we'll see how it turns out.
So, Ed, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, that's a well, you answer really tough questions because need to think about this.
Yeah,
Um, I think I'm a guy who has resilience. That no matter how many times I'm going to get knocked down, I may be wallowing for a little bit on the floor, but I'm going to get back up and go at it. One of the things I don't like is that I feel that I in the last 2 years I haven't had the mission I want to have. That's why I'm pursuing this book because I want to tell the story of the 20th century. This this book is more, and the race is more a metaphor for life. How you live your life is how we ran that race.
yeah,
Despite all the setbacks, despite all that, didn't give up. And I think the metaphor I'm talking about is that there's lessons in the race that can be applied to life when you're coming across something going on that challenges you, that causes you to doubt whether you can go on, getting discouraged. And then, of course, there's always fear. Uh, when if you get enough of a problem in how you're looking at yourself, fear overtakes you because you don't think you can do anything.
yeah,
And fear just darkens the soul. And it's something that you need to have a good foundation. I would recommend all those people who have young kids start, make sure that they learn some of these fundamental lessons because it's going to help them in life. Um, I really think that it's critically important uh, to look at the next generation. And in the book, I talk about this. In the last paragraph, I talk about, you remember, we didn't talk about high school, but I was running a mile relay my last race, and I was the anchor, and I was 24 yards behind the last runner on a quarter mile. And I caught the winner coming off the fourth turn and ended up coming in second. But what I learned from that was just don't be afraid to give it your all, even though it seems impossible. And be proud of the fact you did what you could.
I'm glad all of this, no pun intended, came full circle here and we got to that story. But I think we've given everybody, I was going to ask you, how would you sell this book? But I think we've probably just done that in this short time here with your life. So anybody that wants to get your book, anybody that wants to learn more about you, reach out, anything about your world, where can they go?
EdwardRahill.com. EdwardRahill. And that'll be it. And we're going to I've hired some people to help me. They put together a social network with Instagram and Twitter or X, whatever it is now. And I'm going to start doing book signings. I'm going to go around the country. I've been invited to one here in Atlanta and one in Mississippi already of a major um, bookstore that wants that to happen. And so I think that's how I'm going to get out there. I'm proud of the book because I think it tells a story. I just don't have any expectations on how well, because that's not what it was about. I was just trying to tell a story.
Yeah, that's one of the best advices I've gotten recently. One of my best friends told me about anxiety going to an in-law's house, and he said someone told him to have no expectations and just let it build from there. So it's good advice. Edward, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir, for your time. Thank you for your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for letting me on your show. I hope everything goes very well for you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.